Welcome everyone, thank you for joining me. We've got a new set coming out and that's the Murders at Karlov Manor, and I'm here with another pre-release guide for you. If you have a question about the set, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I do actually answer them. And as always, all of your likes, all of your subscribes really help this channel grow and become the community that it is, and I really appreciate all your support. Diving into this set, there are a few major changes that have happened, and they are going to impact Sealed, so let's go over those. The first major change is that there are no longer draft boosters, they're all going to be play boosters. And I don't want to go over it in extraordinary detail. If you need more information on it, there's a link below about what a play booster is. But I do want to talk about the impact of play boosters on your Sealed experience. Overall, there are going to be fewer commons in every pack. There is a higher likelihood of rares. There's a higher likelihood of more uncommon cards as well. And then there's this whole entire slot 7 list probability that's quite low. In general, most Magic sets they print approximately have 100 commons, 80 uncommons. In this set, they swapped that number. So they printed roughly 80 commons and 100 uncommons. I cannot say with 100% certainty at this time how that will exactly impact every single seal pool and every single gameplay experience, but I can guess that what it's going to do is you're going to have fewer commons that you open, a fewer range of commons that you open, so that's their way of trying to give you a more reliable base of every single deck. You're more likely to get the cards that make every deck work, and then the uncommons are where you're going to add your flair and your differences. I think it'll be okay, but just know that the commons people are playing are going to be pretty much the same commons across the board, depending on what colors they're playing. So expect less variety within the color you choose at the common level. You might expect to also open a few more rares than you usually do, but that variance has happened even in other sets like March of the Machine, where you could open a uncommon or a rare creature card in addition in every pack. So I do expect some sealed pools to have a much higher power level than others just based on luck and what they open. I don't think that's a huge thing that's going to make you not have fun or impact the play experience negatively. It's just going to be what it is. That's part of Sealed. There's also the list in slot 7. If you do not know what the list is, I have a link below describing what the list is and what the list for this particular set is going to be. I'm not going to cover it in detail because if you look at the drop rates for list cards actually showing up in slot 7, if they do show up, most of the time they're going to be commons or uncommons from the list. I looked at the list. I don't think any of those cards are going to be like earth-shatteringly important, whole set shifting cards. You might see them every once in a while drop against you, but I don't think you should play around the cards that are on the list. They're just going to occasionally show up, maybe. Another change that the play boosters bring is the fact that you are going to get one fewer card in every single pack. In draft, I don't think this is going to be very noticeable, but in Sealed, I think you're going to notice 6 fewer cards. I really do. And it's interesting because I don't think those 6 fewer cards would have been as noticeable if there wasn't this other underlying condition of the set, the vast quantity of multicolor cards that they decided to print. There are a grand total of 67 multicolored cards. That makes up about 26% of the set. Some of those cards are commons that can be played as single colors. There's really only 20% of the set that absolutely must play 2 colors for you to have it in your deck. But that's still a very large percentage, especially when you compare it to other sets recently like LCI. It only had 27 multicolor cards, about 10% of the set. Woe was considered a multicolor set, and even that set, with the adventures included, only had 42 multicolor cards, making about 16.5% of the set. Without the adventures, it was about 9%, so that's a huge difference. And you could be saying, well, we're in Ravnica. Ravnica has always had a lot of multicolor cards in it. And while that is true, yes, let's pull up Ravnica Allegiance. It had 33% of the set multicolor cards, but the biggest difference there are all of those cards were in 5 color pairs. This set has 10 different color pairs spread out. So the likelihood of you getting multicolored cards in the same 2 colors is much lower in this set than it was for Ravnica. And those guilds had a lot of support for fixing for those 2 colors, whereas this set, the fixing is more generic and generalized. So what's the point of me bringing up play boosters, 1 fewer card, and the percentage of multicolor cards in the set in general? I think all of that combines to a perfect storm where there are going to be a handful of sealed pools that you open that are just barely scraping by for playables in 2 colors. I don't think it's going to be so bad that it makes it unplayable or makes it not fun, but I do think you're going to feel some very real pressure to either splash for that 3rd color more often than you normally would, or to play more filler to make your 2 colors work. I can also pretty confidently generally say from what I've seen out of the set that I do believe it's going to be a much slower format than we've recently seen. Certainly slower than LCI, Phyrexia All Will Be One, all of the more recent sets. I think you're going to find yourself having more time to develop out your board, do value plays. There is an aggro deck, of course, in the set, and I think it is quite good. I'll touch on that more later, but I do think overall the set will play out just a bit slower. Let's dive into the set mechanics. Most of them are repackaged or repurposed mechanics that we've seen before. First off, investigate. It'll say investigate, you make a clue. A clue is an artifact that you sack for 2. Draw a card. There are many cards in this set that want sacrifice fodder, especially in red and black. There's also blue that cares about artifact count in general. In this set, the most important thing you need to know about investigate is that it is a way to enable payouts. Yes, sacking a clue and drawing a card is good, but it's more important that it's enabling your payouts for sacrifice fodder. And the payouts are very good in this set and abundant, and the enablers are fewer and further between. So making sure that you get the balance between payouts and enablers in your seal pool correct is going to be pretty important. And if you realize that you don't have enough fodder or enablers, then you might not have such good payouts, right? So I think when you look at your seal pool and you look at investigate as a mechanic as a whole, looking at it through the lens of what does this enable, in many ways is much more important than the actual activated ability on the clue itself. Of course, there are going to be times that you pay to sacrifice a clue to draw a card and it's a great value for you, but there's also going to be times that you want that clue to sacrifice for some other purpose later in the game. Another set mechanic is going to be collect evidence. You're going to be diving into your grave to exile cards equal to evidence value or greater, and then you'll get some sort of payout. I believe they included the entire run of split cards for this purpose alone. So it's perfect fodder for collect evidence because these split cards, the mana value when you collect evidence on it will be equal to both spells, not just one of the spells on the card. Shout out to Topiary Panther as also a good way to put a lot of mana value in your grave early in the game. Next we have Suspect. A creature that is suspected, has menace, and can't block. It is a very aggressive mechanic. This is one of those mechanics that is way better if you're on the play versus the draw. I think there are times where you're going to feel really good about giving menace to one of your creatures and it not being able to block, and you're okay with that, but there's also going to be just as many times that you need blockers and you don't want suspected creatures. You can suspect your opponent's creatures if you want to remove a blocker and do kind of a pseudo removal, but even that's not really the best play you could possibly do most of the time. There is a mythic that's worth building around on Suspect, but it also enables Suspect itself, so you don't really need to play a lot of other Suspect cards just to make that one card work. You can play it just itself, standalone. Anyway, I don't expect Suspect to be amazing. I think there are a few times where it'll feel incredible, but there's just as many times that it's just going to feel really bad. I would be very careful with how much Suspect I use in my deck. The last mechanic of the set is the most set-defining mechanic. I think it's going to have the highest impact on how the set plays out, and that's going to be Disguise and Cloak. The two mechanics are very similar, but have very key differences. Let's go over that difference. So Disguise allows you to pay 3 mana and put a card from your hand onto the battlefield as a 2/2 with Ward 2. Later, you can flip that card over for the face side of it for whatever that disguise cost is printed on the card. Cloak takes cards that may be creatures, may not be creatures, and puts them onto the battlefield as a 2/2 Ward 2 creature. A cloaked creature card's flip cost is the original casting cost of the creature spell. You cannot flip the cloak card over unless it is a creature card, or it is a non-creature card with a disguise ability. If you happen to cloak a card that also has disguise, you may turn that card face up for the disguise cost at any time, whether it is a creature or not. So cloaking, for instance, this land that also has disguise, is a card you can actually turn over even though it's not a creature card. However, if you cloaked this land, you would not be able to turn that over. The most confusing part about Cloak in the set is definitely Etrata. She's the workaround where if you happen to cloak an instant, a sorcery, an enchantment, can you cast it? With Etrata, you can. You can flip it over because it's going to go to exile and then you can cast it. She doesn't work with lands, keep that in mind, but she's kind of a workaround exception to Cloak. Most of the time, if a card's cloaked and it's not a creature, it's just going to be a 2/2, ward 2 for the rest of the game. The other workaround to get a cloaked card that is not a creature back into your hand so that you can actually cast it if it's an important sorcery or something is you could always bounce the creature back to your hand, and at that point it would be a sorcery in your hand that you could cast. Anyway, that is Cloak. That's how it's different than Disguise. The vast majority of the time, you will only see disguised cards, not cloaked cards. As far as Disguise goes, we've been here before. It's exactly like Morph. I mean, it is exactly like Morph. Even down to the whole 5 mana is the barrier you need in order to have a creature that's going to flip over that can just straight out eat your 2/2 creature. There are a few iffy cards that kind of push that boundary in this set. I find these pushing the boundary disguise cards particularly fascinating, and I think they'll be pretty effective. Disguise is a pretty slow mechanic, but it can be a very strong mechanic, so I wouldn't overlook it. It can win you a board state. Rounding out our discussion on Disguise, I think it's important to note that there is an entire run of common cards in every single color that do have Disguise, and if you use the Disguise cost, you can cast them as a single color card. If you play them out straight from your hand, they're going to have to be multicolor, but these cards are pretty flexible, especially in Draft and Sealed, to be able to work in decks where maybe you only are playing one of the colors presented on the card, but you can use that if you cast it for Disguise. Lastly, this set introduces cases. Cases are really good. Like, when sagas became a thing, they were really good. Cases are good. Cases are basically sagas. Really good sagas. I don't think any of the cases are unplayable. They're all pretty good. The way a case works is the first box becomes activated when it enters the battlefield. You do what it says. If it's a stagnant ability, like the one on the left, it'll be in effect for the entire time the enchantment case is on the board. If it's a one-time ETB, like the one on the right, it'll trigger just the one time on its ETB when it enters the battlefield. To solve it, you have to meet the conditions outlined in box 2. If the conditions are met at your end step and after the case resolves on the stack, it has to actually be true when this trigger resolves on the stack. Somebody can interrupt the trigger while it's on the stack trying to solve. If it solves, you then have access to the bottom box. Some cases, once they're cracked, give you that third box is a stagnant ability that's just on the battlefield. You'll have the first box and the third box active at the same time once it's cracked. Some cases you have to sacrifice the case in order to get the third ability value out of it. If you have to sacrifice the case or activate an ability by paying a mana, it'll also indicate what speed that can be done at. Some are more difficult to solve than others, and obviously the easier the case is to solve, probably the better the case is. I mean, some cases you might never expect to solve it, but even then, most of the cases are very good cards. Cases are good value, and this set is going to be a lot about value. All right, let's move into the specific cards themselves. What do the colors want you to be doing? How is this set actually playing? Let's talk about the cards. My general overall feeling of this set is it's going to be slow, which means you can't afford to get blown out by combat tricks and by disguise cards. You spending your mana efficiently every turn is going to be key to you keeping pace on board. Having the balance between payouts and enablers for your synergies are going to be crucial so that you can actually do the things you need to do on turn for all your mana. I think board states in this set have the potential to snowball out of control very quickly. I think flying in general is going to be very good because the ground is going to be a little bit more stopped up. There are some large toughness cards in the set. On the same note, large reach creatures are going to be very important too to stop the flyers. I do think that equipments are going to be important to run, or ways to be able to buff up your smaller creatures to make them more relevant as the game progresses, or to change around power and toughness levels to make the matchup more even on board or to keep pace. Those flexible options are going to be really good. Lastly, I think the most complicated part of the set is definitely going to be the gameplay experience, the decisions you make in-game. Do I block? Do I attack? What's going on with mana open for my OP? Timing's important. I don't think you should feel bad if you go into pre-release and you start getting blown out by some tricks or some disguise cards. It's going to happen. That's how we learn sets. Just go into it expecting, the gameplay, you might not play it perfectly the first few times, and that's okay. You'll learn and get better. Let's move into white. I have a hard time seeing you play white without playing detectives to some extent. There's a large theme of white caring about creatures that have 2 power or less. There's some payouts for it. There are some enablers for it. White is very much a play small creatures early, try and get aggressive strategy. Lots of detective payouts, lots of detective enablers. White is pretty good if you're playing detectives. Now, detectives are in every single color, not just white. But I think white, if you are playing it, to some extent, you're probably going to be playing detectives as well. White has actually some okay removal for the set. I think removal gets tricky because of the Ward 2 on a lot of the disguise cards / morph cards. There'll be a handful of cards you just can't touch till turn 4 anyway with the removal, even if it's a 2-mana removal. So keep that in mind, that removal spells, even though they cost 2 or 1, maybe it's a turn 3 or turn 4 play instead. But white's removal suite looks okay. There's a lot of board wipes, and not just in white. That's very interesting. But I think white's strategy of playing detectives, going for 2/2s, and then maybe trying to win in the air with some flyers is decent enough. Blue also has a very strong detective theme. Unlike white, I think the detectives in blue care a bit more about artifacts as well. There's a handful of payouts for having several artifacts in blue. Also, instead of going wide like white and trying to be really aggressive with your detectives, I think blue has a little bit more merit into bounce, control, tempo, and going for value plays more. So just a little bit different from white, but I still think blue, you're going to be mainly playing detectives. The best detective cards in the set have blue on them in general. But I think one of the more important things about blue is that it has a few ways to kind of blow people out. I especially want to call out Eliminate the Impossible. I think this card could be incredible. It's just got massive potential for a huge quasi-board wipe, basically of your opponent's creatures only, plus the benefit of Investigate to give you sacrifice fodder. It's just a really good card in blue. I think it will perform very well in this set. Similarly, black has the potential for huge blowouts with the spell Murder. Simply wait for your opponent to morph their creature and then cast Murder on it after it's morphed. Not only will they have wasted their mana for that turn, but you have destroyed their creature without having to pay the Ward 2. There's also just a lot of really good creature cards in the set that Murder would take care of as well. Black also has some really, really strong board wipes, card stealing abilities, card value engines, creatures that are just really good. There are more than a handful of cards in black that would be a good reason for you to play black in your sealed pool. The commons are a little hit and miss. Just be mindful that if you're playing a lot of small 1/1s in black, that you have ways to pump them up or make them more relevant to trade off with 2/2s on the board. The final thing I'm seeing about black is that in order for the cards to be at their best, you need very specific conditions to be met. So there are a few cards that are quite good just on their own, but there also are just as many cards, especially in the multicolor black cards, that need a lot of conditions to be met just to even scrape by as a playable card. So in sealed, maybe there'll be a few more black cards that are multicolor cards that you feel like you can't play just because you don't have the synergies for them. Just be aware of that. I think red's cards are very strong individually as well. I think red as a color is pretty good. It's a very aggressive color in a set that wants to be slower, so there are some risks to that. I think the largest risk you run in red is not having enough sacrifice fodder. So red in particular is a color I'm looking at and saying, if you're playing it, you really need to triple check you have enough enablers, enough sacrifice fodder to make these cards really shine. Especially for the Goblin build, I think it can be an incredible build, but you're going to need artifacts to sacrifice, and plenty of them. So, cards that are like the Harried Dronesmith are going to be really, really, really important in red. It's not a very impressive card on the surface as a 4-mana 2/3. It's a little understated, But the fact that you're getting a artifact to sacrifice every single turn matters greatly in this set for all the other cards in red. So I think that this card in particular is one of the best enablers in red. I think red has some incredible bombs, maybe the best card in the format that you just read and you go, okay, sure, you win the game. The removal's okay. I like Vengeful Tracker. I just really do. I think for a 2-drop in the set, it's one of the better 2-drops, if not the best 2-drop. It's really good. It's a 2/2 for 2 that has potential upside. There's nothing to not like about it. It'll trade off with a lot of 3-mana plays in the format, and I think it'll pull some overtime weight against certain decks. Green is a really interesting color in this set in that I think the early game plays are really a little bit lackluster, kind of like black's early plays are a little bit lackluster. There are a few good early plays for green, but green really wants you to ramp up and get going quickly to the higher mana cost spells. So green is very focused on ramp, very focused on fixing. It's one of the better colors to find fixing for that 3rd color splash, that 4th color, that 5th color even. But a lot of times the cards want you to be playing heavy base green. So keep in mind that if you're playing green, it's a good color to go 5 colors or 4 colors or 3 colors with. But green will need to be your base color, not your splash color, more times than not. One thing I particularly like about green in the set is despite its slow start, the ability to put 1/1 counters on things pretty early in the game, I think will make a very big difference. I think the green disguise creatures and multicolored creatures are definitely very strong. Definitely a reason to play green. Green has some really great payouts if you can get to 4 mana and not be too far behind on the board. So definitely keep in mind how fast you're ramping so you can get to these cards before losing. They're very powerful though. There's also just a handful of green cards that I'm not too excited about. Green also has a different token creature theme that has some benefits. The oozes aren't really going to come together in sealed, most likely, so I would stay away from that card in particular in sealed. Otherwise, green looks really good, I think. It's just a little bit slower. The artifacts in this set are mainly pretty scarce. There's a 2-drop that's a 1/3 that filters mana colors. I think that's very playable, especially if you're trying to go for 3 colors in sealed. I think Magnetic Snuffler is the secret, really good 5-drop of the format. Mainly because all of these clue equipments that I think you should maybe consider running, at least one of them, they sacrifice early game for value, and then the Snuffler can buy that value back and gain its own value off of it as well. So I think the Snuffler is a hidden gem of an uncommon artifact card that can slip into any deck. I think it's very good, especially if you have equipments that you can sack and buy back value later with it. Be on the lookout for that particular artifact in your sealed pool. Finally, the multicolor cards. 20% of the set are multicolor cards. I think you're just going to have to look at your sealed pool and see what kind of support you have for each color pairing and see which one's most viable and where can you get splashes that you can kind of sneak in. I think the decision of how far can you stretch your mana is going to depend on what kind of fixing you open. So let's go over the fixing. I really do firmly believe that almost every sealed pool in this set will merit you splashing for some sort of multicolor card. Maybe it won't be a heavy splash, but I really see a hard time with the vast majority of sealed pools being able to pull together just a 2-color deck. I think that will still happen, yes. I think it's going to be less normal than it has been previous sets. So you will need to assess your fixing for your sealed pool. How much of it do you have? Are you meeting the land requirements that you need to be able to play certain cards? Are certain cards bomb worthy, worth stretching your mana base just to be able to land it because they win the game by themselves? There are quite a few of those, so certainly if I opened one of these, I would stretch my mana to try and play these cards in my sealed pool almost every time. The fixing, some is good, some is bad. Recognizing the difference is a skill. So, for instance, I wouldn't necessarily want to play Public Thoroughfare unless I was going 4 colors, 5 colors, or had no other choice because I didn't have any other fixing, so I needed to play it. Because what it requires is for you to take turn 2 off just to get your fixing for turn 3, whereas this Golem it gives you a creature on turn 2, and then it fixes you for turn 3 as well. So you're not necessarily falling behind on board just because you played the 1/3. It is more risky because if they remove the 1/3, obviously your fixing is gone, but at the same time you're not losing pace. So there's just a little bit difference in what quality there is. Same with the escape tunnel. You take turn 1, you play it, you tap it, you go get the land color that you need that you don't have in your hand already. And then on turn 2, you already have both colors, and you can play a 2-drop that has 2 colors on it. I think that is important as well. A little bit better than Public Thoroughfare for the same reason. You're not wasting turn 2 just to get your mana right. So keep in mind how slow you're making your deck by having to fix your mana, and whether that is worth the cards you're trying to splash for. There's always going to be give and take there. There is a 5-color build in the format, and for those of you who open the one seal pool that can do it, I congratulate you, but I don't think most seal pools will have the support to play Niv Mizzet. Last thing you need to know specifically for just pre-release kits. Your pre-released kits are going to have one of 3 mythic cards in them. This is not the stamped date foil promo card that you get that you can play. These are 3 specific cards that do not appear in any play boosters. You'll never see them in draft, and you cannot play with them in your seal pool. So everybody's going to get one of these. You can't play with the card. However, they are legal in standard. Go figure. Anyway, that is it for the set. I did not have time to cover everything I wanted. The set had a lot of things that we needed to cover in terms of just general, these are the cards you're going to open, these are how the packs are structured. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. If I didn't cover anything that you were curious about, that's the perfect place to ask it, and I'll try and get back to you before Friday. Thanks for watching me, and thanks for supporting the channel as always. I appreciate you all. Have fun.